because that would make a lot more sense to me.
Mr. Chair. Stuart Nash. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We are talking about clauses 1 and 2, the title and commencement. And Leanne Dalzell brings up a couple of good points. It's always good following Leanne, apart from the fact she steals a lot of my arguments. It's good because she poses questions. And I suppose one of the words in the title is actually Act. This Act is the Westpac New Zealand Act 2010. Now, Leanne Dalzell did bring up an important point, and I do know, Mr. Chair, as the member and the Chair will know also, that consideration was given to using the Westpac New Zealand Act 2006, but this was considered not feasible because it wasn't actually drafted with the intention of being used for a second vesting. And this is why the new Act was necessary. So, I wonder if the 2006 Act, they thought, it doesn't get any bigger than this, and then here we are in 2011, and we're saying it's not going to get any bigger than this, so we're going to approach this in 2016 with the same sort of, approach, and we'll say, well, it won't happen again. But you just never know. So, but the other thing also I would like to ask is, this Act is the Westpac New Zealand Act 2010, and it did get me thinking, as I think we were talking about. When the bill receives royal assent, will it actually be changed to the Westpac New Zealand Act 2011, or is that it will be changed to 2011?
I checked with Pete Hodson. He knows everything.
He does. Oh, okay. Well, that's good to know. It is good to know. So, well, in fact, 2010 there will actually change. So in the bill at the moment, there will be a change. It will say this Act is the Westpac New Zealand Act 2011.
The clerk will fix it before it goes for assent.
Oh, the clerks are very good like that. Yeah, they are. But the other thing also, there are a couple of things we talked about. I mean, 2011 it will receive royal assent. As we talked about before, there are a couple of subsections or amendments to the Westpac New Zealand Act 2006, which came into effect on the 31st of March 2008, retrospectively, I suppose. Another one from September 2006, so probably just after the original Westpac bill came into force. This bill, as mentioned, is largely based on the Westpac New Zealand Act 2006. And like that Act, the bill facilitates the vesting by providing an overall legal framework for the transfer of the assets and liabilities from Westpac Banking Corporation to Westpac New Zealand. And I suppose in a way it's good because what it means is that the New Zealand banking sector is growing. The facilities that are demanded by New Zealand companies need to be bigger, therefore perhaps the economy is expanding. But one thing that Mr Cunliffe talked about is, the bill is called Westpac New Zealand and saying that this is overseen by the Reserve Bank of New Zealand. But the sad thing is, Mr Chair, is that Westpac actually is a New Zealand-owned bank. So all the profits that Westpac New Zealand make, well, most of them will actually go back to their Australian shareholders. They won't come back to New Zealanders. An interesting fact is Westpac New Zealand, Westpac generally, has its 150-year anniversary next year. So this is a very old bank. I think it started out as a New Zealand bank, but somewhere along the line it was sold. And if we look at all the major banks here, ASB Bank used to be called the Auckland Savings Bank, sold to Australians. All the profits there go overshore. ANZ National Bank, the National used to stand for National New Zealand, sold, gone. BNZ used to stand for the Bank of New Zealand, gone. I mean, all the major banks of New Zealand, even though they're controlled by the Reserve Bank, are all owned by Australian parents. So all the dividends that are earned by the four major banks in New Zealand all return across the Tasman to their parents, not to the pockets of New Zealanders or back to the government in terms of revenue. They go to Australia, which is a great shame, Mr Chair. And I suppose it's the one shining light is that Kiwi Bank is still New Zealand owned, and I hope and I pray that it will continue to be New Zealand owned. Mind you, if I look at the agenda of the government when they talk about selling assets, I wonder if in fact...
Look, this is the title clause and the commencement clause. And whilst both McGee and standing orders do say members can summarise the debate, the member is not summarising, he's introducing new material. Please contain himself to what's provided.
Thank you very much, Mr Chair, I will. But what I was saying, talking about the title of this Act, and it is the Westpac New Zealand Act, and the reason it is called the New Zealand Act, as Mr Cunliffe put down, is because this is about the New Zealand branch. It governs the rules around the prudential requirements of the New Zealand branch of Westpac Corporation. As we know, Westpac Corporation is based in Australia. Westpac New Zealand is a branch of Westpac Corporation, but as I was saying, that the vast majority of dividends from Westpac New Zealand, in fact all the dividends, go to its parent company, which is a real shame. One thing I was saying is the transfer will actually mean that Westpac New Zealand will increase in size. We do know that. I wonder, we're talking about $42 billion, Mr Chair.
Stuart Nash.
Oh, God. We're talking about what is this guy doing over there? We're talking about $42 billion worth of debt against the agricultural sector. And I wonder how much of that debt is actually vested with the Westpac Bank.
Considerable amount.
Yeah, considerable amount.
Yeah.
So I suppose even though the Westpac Bank is growing, and this is the reason for this bill, we have to be a little bit careful when we look at a growing bank and not to just simply assume that this is a growth in New Zealand economy. Part of it is in fact a growth in the debt profile of these banks, and a large portion of that is in fact to the agricultural sector. I'm not too sure how much Westpac New Zealand does have of that, but this may be one of the reasons why we are in fact debating this bill, Mr Chair, because the liabilities of Westpac New Zealand are such that it needs to increase that prudential rate above the $15 billion. It is still a significant bank, of that is no doubt. I'm unsure if it's the biggest bank. This being my first term, Mr Chair, I'm unsure if we have passed similar legislation titled the ANZ New Zealand Act 2000 and something, or there's been the BNZ New Zealand Act. Wouldn't that be ironic? The Bank of New Zealand Act, regulating the New Zealand branch of the BNZ. But there are very good reasons for this. It is a very sound piece of legislation. It protects the interests of all customers, Mr Chair. It protects the interests of all suppliers. It protects the interests of all employees. We have made that very clear as it went through the Select Committee. It is a good piece of legislation, and that is why I commend it to the House. Thank you.
Very good.
The question is that Clause 1 stand part. Those of that opinion will say aye.
Aye.
Contrary no. The ayes have it. The question is that Clause 2 stand part. Those of that opinion will say aye.
Aye.
Contrary no. The ayes have it. I will report this bill without amendment presently. Yeah. Yes, you are. Members, we now move to further consideration of the Royal Society of New Zealand Amendment Bill. And members, when we last considered the